I distinctly remember a bit of feedback from the pastor who gave me the opportunity to preach that weekend. And it's stuck with me ever since in the best kind of way. It was like a dagger to the heart.
Yeah.
But it's helped me ever since. The bit of feedback I remember him sharing with me was there could have been more gospel in it. And I don't think I've preached a sermon since where that didn't cross my mind and heart and keystrokes to really get at the heart of the matter, how the gospel can be preached through this text.
Now, deep thoughts.
Whoa, that's pretty deep.
Hey, you're listening to the Deep Thoughts Podcast, a podcast that explores the Christian faith a little more deeply. I'm your host, Matt Shantz, and it has been a year since I did an episode, so this is like long overdue. I do this podcast as like a passion project. I love doing it, absolutely, but it's very much like a side gig. If the rest of my life gets busy, this is the first thing to be tossed by the wayside. So clearly had a busy year. But actually, as summer was progressing, a lot of conversations were on my mind of potential conversations I could have, just getting really excited about the possibility of. And so we've stacked like a few interviews here. And so we have a few episodes coming out in the next few weeks, ones that I think you're really going to love. But we're kicking it all off, getting it running again by actually sharing a crossover episode from my friends at the Expositors Collective. My buddy Mike Neglia interviewed me a while back on preaching. If you're listening to this and you are a preacher, or you really care about preaching, I commend the Expositors Collective podcast and ministry to you. The conversation I got to have with Mike was fun. Looking forward to sharing it with you. He asked me all kinds of questions about everything from my first sermon to sermon prep, preaching the gospel, who to quote, the whole study process, and raising up more preachers. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So here's my crossover episode with the Expositors Collective on preaching the gospel and raising up preachers.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Doing great, Mike. It's good to see you, man.
Really good to reconnect with you. I'm sure I would have said this at the intro, but you and I studied together under Professor Gary Bashir's on Zoom for many hours. And it's good to talk to you once again.
Yeah, that's right. You too.
So we graduated a year plus, I think. Mm-hmm. How has your degree helped your life since then?
Well, I thought it would free up so much time, and it's amazing where that time actually goes, which is probably a good reason to do things of substance because you can fit them into your life. And so we were able to fit doing a master's into our lives. And then when it's done, you wonder where all the time goes. But I've been applying it in sort of every area of my life, not just in my pastoral work, but as a husband and a father and a friend. Like of course, the kind of formational work that happens not only with Dr. Gary Bashir's, but with this really wonderful cohort of Jesus loving people, who's a real blessing in my life. So we actually have like a little check-in call at the time of this recording, a little check-in call tomorrow with our group.
Yeah,
those relationships are rich.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's cool, I know that Western doesn't like invent this, I don't think, but the idea of kind of a cohort. So there's a batch of students and the students are together for 3 years with usually the same professor. And then there's kind of visitors that come in and out, but like the class stays the same. There's minor variations. In fact, you guys got started early and I kind of dropped in halfway through. So
that's right.
Everyone has these deep 3-year relationships and I showed up a year and a half in. So I'm kind of trailing behind for some of the relational connections, but that's our advertisement for Western Seminary done. All right, totally. Now on to like the main event. So we're Expositors Collective. We're here about like teaching and preaching. So I always love to start the interviews by asking about your first sermon. It's kind of a cool way to get to know you and your context. Matt, do you remember the first time you preached God's word?
I do. If I can cheat a little bit, I'd like to give you two answers to that question.
Okay.
I think that'll make sense. But so I played music in like high school, and I got roped into leading worship and church events and ministries, and I was a part of a big church where the young adult ministry itself was like multiple hundreds of people. So it was like a midweek church service for young adults, and I would lead the music for that. And we were in a transition of pastors at that time. I would say I was probably 23, 22 years old. And they needed somebody to teach on a Wednesday night. And my first sermon ever was in this sort of young adults ministry context.
Yes.
Midweek, couple hundred young people. I'm like one of them. I'm their age. And I remember preaching a very suspect sermon on a portion of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus, says, if someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them the other also. If they tell you to walk a mile, walk two. And I use like a very like Walter Wink oriented, you actually are both standing up to oppression in those things and freeing the oppressed. And it was sort of a third way kind of a sermon, which in a Mennonite Brethren church like I was in, that was sort of the approach you would have, is sort of this pacifist movement kind of thing, is you turn the cheek, you don't slap someone back. You actually turn the cheek and let them hit you again. But that itself is, retaliation in a pacifist kind of way of nonviolent resistance. And the sermon was very much along those sorts of lines. I became a much more reformed man in my theology in the years that followed, kind of by conviction, not by upbringing or context. And so that sermon, I actually, in preparation for this, I found old slides, like a slide deck.
Yeah.
And it was endearing and horrifying all at once.
Wow. If you want to send them on, maybe we could just put some of them in this YouTube video.
Wow, sure.
Maybe. Yeah. Hey, okay. Walter Wink. So Expositors Collective, we have a social media aspect to this. We have quotes about preaching that kind of get sent out. And I came across, I think Frederick Dale Bruner quoted Walter Wink he's talking about John the Baptist, and he has some cool thing from Walter Wink about preaching. And I like that quote. And so typed it up, sent it out. Then afterwards, I got a message from somebody being like, brother, you do not want to be endorsing Walter Wink. He is an annihilationist. You do not want to be endorsing him. Like, I like what he says about preaching. I didn't do a research about everything he believed. I just saw a quote of his in another book that I thought was cool.
That's an interesting subject all its own of, do you use a quote? I'm taking over here already,
sure.
But
yeah. Let the listener know that Matt also hosts a podcast, so he's used to interviewing rather than being interviewed. Yeah. So, okay, yes.
This is something a preacher needs. This is something a preacher needs to address: is, do I share a quote on the merits of the substance of it, or do I need to be particularly mindful of the person behind it? And I think I think there's times when it's, yes, it matters who's saying it. I think there's times when no, so Richard Dawkins, I might quote him. That would mean I'm not endorsing him, but I'm actually pushing back on an idea. But what if, Tony Campolo, and I think a great guy, and I love a lot of what he does, but would my church be hearing me say that that pastor endorses everything Tony ever said? And of course I don't. So it's funny you say that about Walter Wink, because I've had those instances too, where like on the merits of what I'm sharing and the point I'm making, this does that, but there's always he believes these other things too. It's a fascinating conversation.
Yeah. Sometimes, the social media for Expositors Collective, that's one thing. But I think what most people are interested in, what you're talking about, which is quoting people in sermons. And sometimes I'll quote people that, I certainly disagree with, because it's surprising, like even Richard Dawkins sees, that justice is real, So it's worthwhile sometimes to have a contrarian voice that is aligning with what you're saying, or you're highlighting something that you think is wrong. You want to isolate that. But then it's that third option. What about when somebody that you're not crazy about says something pretty good, and I guess you have to know your audience too, know your congregation. Are they allured by that stream of theology, and would they see that as an endorsement, or is this just like so random that they're not going to Google him and find out this, that, or the other? So
Yeah,
let the listener understand.
that's right. No, that's a good word. Yep.
So you said you had two stories about your first sermon. I've only heard one. Is your second one going to be about like when you became reformed and when you truly began to preach?
It was in the process, and
really?
I about a year later, I was given the opportunity, maybe more than that, but yeah, a year and a half, something like that. Later, I was given the opportunity to preach on the weekend at this church, like 3 services, wow. Big church. And I was given a text in 1 Corinthians 7, primarily about circumcision. And so I was like 23, 24. Yeah. And, but yeah, lead the life that the Lord has assigned to you, that kind of a text. And I look back on that, and it was an amazing opportunity. I was much more encouraged by the notes that I looked back on and read from. I distinctly remember a bit of feedback from the pastor who gave me the opportunity to preach that weekend. And it's stuck with me ever since in the best kind of way. It was like a dagger to the heart.
Yeah.
But it's helped me ever since. The bit of feedback I remember him sharing with me was there could have been more gospel in it. And I don't think I've preached a sermon since where that didn't cross my mind and heart and keystrokes to really get at the heart of the matter, how the gospel can be preached through this text. And so, yeah, a difficult word at the time. I was like, oh, that's almost the worst thing I could hear back. And yet so formative for me for every future sermon.
Wonderful. What was his name?
Jeff Bucknam, Dr. Jeff Bucknam. He's at Harvest in Chicago now. Yeah.
Shout out to Jeff Bucknam. That's great. And so that's kind of haunted you in a good way ever since.
Yes.
Wonderful. That's okay. Okay. Well, the very next question that, is like, well, over the years, how has your preaching changed? So, now, I mean, could Jeff Bucknam ever say to you like, hey, Matt, there's too much gospel in this?
I hope so. I hope he doubles back and tells me, you know what, you're pouring it on a little too thick. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. We're constantly, I feel like a student, right? As a preacher, you're a student as much as you're the lecturer or the preacher. One thing I noticed early on and that I've changed, I changed years ago, was, and the way I phrase it is, I think I used to be more of an exegetical preacher early on. So I became reformed, really honoring the text. And I think I mixed up exegetical preaching with what I really should have been after, which was expositional preaching. And the distinction would be, I think a commentary will go verse by verse, saying a lot about what that verse means, parsing out words in the original language. It's quite cumbersome. And I don't think the congregation need to hear all of that. Occasionally, they need to hear some of that because that's going to be really important for interpretation or application. But I would just very much 80% of my sermon would be just slogging through very technical work because I thought that was expositional preaching. And so I've another aspect of that is I'd be working through these texts and I'd be trying to find like, well, what do these first 3 verses of my sermon really say? And I would essentially preach a mini sermon on that. And then I'd get to the next verses and preach a mini sermon on that. And so I would have like a 3-point sermon, and they would almost be independent, going in different directions sermons. And so a big lesson for me years back was just what is the thrust of this text? What's the big idea? I should be able to summarize in a sentence what my sermon was about this past Sunday, or is going to be about later this week. And so I view it more now as there's a big idea or a diamond, and my points are angles of the diamond, not three different jewels completely. And that's been a major shift for me. Another dynamic is just a little is my percentages of explaining the text and then applying the text. I've tried to boost up the application points, not be too quick on explaining the text, but realizing I can probably explain it quicker than I'm spending time on, or can tend to spend time on. Is just really, really, really explaining it. And people are like 5 minutes, or like, I understood it 5 minutes ago. And so it actually opens up how we can apply this in a myriad of ways in our lives. So I'm trying to boost the percentage of application for people, whatever that variety of applications might be. So,
yeah. Well, on the first thing, and maybe we'll work towards the other one. On the first thing, yeah, you mentioned that, yeah, rather than three little thoughts about one verse followed by three, I can affirm you're doing that. You've adapted, you've grown, you've changed. I listened to a sermon from yours from last week, or 9 days ago was when I saw it. The Jesus dines with sinners, and you kind of presented, here's the big idea, and then you said, like, and now I want to talk to you about 5 things that we need to know about dining with sinners, and then you just brought out these things like from the text, but then very much like in people's lives, and they were like sequential, they were connected, but they were also very much kind of like, this is not just for you to learn about ancient dietary practices, or or what's a sinner, or what's a tax collector, or blah 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 blah, but like bringing an idea to your people. So good job, you're doing it.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate that. And at every turn, right, you are being faithful to the text. Like I want my people to have their Bibles open, and I'm just like, this isn't my idea about how you dine with sinners. Jesus was doing it. Do you see this aspect? Okay, great. Now, do you see this aspect? Let's apply that. And so they have to wrestle with the word and how provocative Jesus was in an instance like that. And so it is focused on the scripture, but it's bringing it to them and one subject. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned, exegetical and then transitioning to expository. Did someone help you to see that? Was that from reflecting upon your own messages and decided to change it? Or did you have somebody else come in and haunt you with some feedback that changed?
I don't remember haunting feedback this time, so that's positive.
Okay.
Maybe I think I don't listen to much preaching lately. I think for the last couple of years, I don't listen to a lot of other preaching. We've got so many preachers in our church, and from different campuses, we can talk about that. But so I often listen to our in-house preachers, evaluating them, and I don't have too much more time and sometimes appetite to just listen to preaching. And yet there was a time when hearing a few preachers I really trusted and was just ministered to my own soul, you kind of see the pattern of how they built sermons. And so that was very instructive for me. And I've done some teaching on preaching, and even that was, and so I did a lot of reading on preaching and just, learning from a couple solid preaching books and stuff like that.
Yeah, I love teaching about preaching because I just keep seeing like, oh, I could do that, or oh, that's a good, it certainly helps me to be aware of, small incremental changes that I can be making. So I'm thankful for it. I want to ask you a question about like your sermon prep routine. So how long have you been preaching kind of week in or week out? I know that you don't preach every single week, but how long has this been kind of your main thing?
11 and a half years.
Okay.
Actually, probably just over 12, because I was the primary teaching pastor before I became the lead for a season before becoming the lead pastor. And I'm of the church I'm in, which is 11 and a half years. I've gotten into a groove of preaching 3 out of 5 Sundays.
Okay.
And so been doing it long enough where what's sustainable. My role has a few major elements to it, preaching being one and a primary one, but it's not possible to preach all the time. I'm thankful for the pacing there, and so it's very all encompassing to me, like or all consuming, I should say. And so I think my family's grateful for those 2 out of 5 where the weekends seem lighter, stuff like that.
And
so yes.
Yeah. Cool. That's yeah. Cool rhythm. But in those
Sorry.
11 years of preaching, most of the weeks, you prepared a lot. How has your prep changed, or is there something in your prep? Have you kind of noticed patterns that you'd want to pass on that might be good for people that are preparing this journey towards preaching?
Yes. When it comes to my prep, I don't feel like much of a model. I feel like I have some bad habits I'm still trying to work on. I write too much of my sermons on Friday mornings, Saturday nights, just because of the demands of the work week. And so I try and prioritize it. I do a lot of study earlier in the week, and then the writing sort of clicks at a certain point when I've studied enough that I find that I have. Once I get my outline, the sermon comes very fast. So it's very slow, and then it's all of a sudden fast for me. One of the things I've changed in my prep is I used to turn to resources right away, years ago. Would be what do the smart people say? What do the commentary writers say? And I'd have a technical commentary and then maybe more of a pastoral commentary, but I read those early. And one thing I've changed is now I still utilize resources like that, but I utilize them late. Essentially, when I would read them early, I couldn't get away from my sermons being very in step with what those were saying, even structurally sometimes. Just sort of, I would kind of get all my ideas from the way that they saw it. And now I use them late, essentially to just ensure I'm not a heretic, Is this what the others are saying as well? Am I out to lunch, or is this am I on the right page? So I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but really enough in resources that you make sure you're not on an island or seeing this in a way that isn't kind of how people have throughout the ages. And so, to be honest, it's a lot less resources and a lot more prayer. A lot more time with my Bible open and a sheet of paper. And I ensure, this is more in recent years, I ask questions that I have of the text. And then I go through it again, and I ask questions that an unbeliever who might be in the room would have of the text. I go through it again. I ask questions that some newer believers or believers that don't know their Bibles very well. I try and think of the demographics of people. And so I have a whole list of questions, and then I have to determine what needs to be answered in a sermon, what doesn't. You have to make editing choices, right? There's only so much time. And preachers leave more on the editing room floor than they do put in their sermon, and you have to make those decisions, but there's so much work that goes into that. So, I was preaching Leviticus 16 during Lent. We were in Leviticus, and in Leviticus 16, multiple times there's this reference to Azazel. And you're like, what is that? And you have to name it. You have to spend some time with it. Even if it's not gonna be a real focus, you can't punt it. You can't not reference this weird term to something. And so, because I ask questions of the text and then I discover what they mean, I figure out, okay, how do I communicate this question of the text that pretty much everyone's going to have? And so that answering questions is a big part of my process. Resources late, prayer and Bible study early. I try and sketch things out early. I also have a unique context here at Central where we have 4 campuses. We used to have 5 campuses, but one of those has become its own autonomous church. So we would have 4 preachers. Now we have 3 preachers in our church who are preaching that Sunday on the same text. And so we get together on a Tuesday beforehand and look at that together. And so that's a big part of my prep too, is I'm used to preaching being kind of an isolated solo endeavor. Preacher gets into his study and works on his sermon. A great gift here at our church is there's 3 of us who are going to preach this text together, on Sunday. There's a collaborative element. There's a community element to it. Now that's Tuesday. We literally have a line where we say, now these are just Tuesday thoughts, but here's something I'm seeing in the text, because there is so much more we go away and do the in isolation solo portion, but it's rich to get to have a part of prep being with other preachers. There's not a Tuesday that I walk away from that there isn't something, an insight from one of the other guys that doesn't work its way into the sermon. Like, it's just like, that was I didn't see that. That's so, it's insightful. And I love that. I love that to a degree, preaching can be a community exercise. And so we love that.
Yeah. Well, the tagline for this show is, we want to help you grow in your personal study and public proclamation of God's word. But it sounds like some of your study isn't so personal. It's collaborative, or it's around a table, or it's, and when you were listing out the various questions that you ask of the text, kind of running through it those multiple times, I was going to ask you, like, well, how do you come up with those questions? But maybe some of it comes from Tuesday, from you guys chatting about it together.
Yep. Some of it comes from Tuesday.
Yeah.
Some of it comes from, a shepherd smelling like his sheep. Actually spends time with his people. Like, I think of people in my life who don't know Jesus, and we have faith conversations, and those are informative. I think of people I meet with and where they're at in their faith. And so some of it's me trying to assume, but from an educated place of like knowing people in these categories. And sometimes I'll even just strike up conversations with people, kind of like tease things out, during the week. I'm thinking about something. Where are people at with this? What, do they understand this issue? So those would be a few approaches.
Yeah. Are you blunt? Are you like, hey, I'm working on a sermon about Jesus eating with sinners. You're a sinner. Has anyone ever, like,
I thought of you right away. Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes, I mean, it's totally random. It really depends. There's so many funny dynamics going on, but yeah, sometimes I'm like, hey, I'm working on something in this sermon, and this is the thing. Like, do you guys think about this? And of course, sometimes it's just like staff around the building and stuff, and picking their brains. And we have younger people and different age groups and kind of different walks of life, and it's interesting. Sometimes I'll canvas them, and yeah.
Love that. That's great. And again, and if we want to scale this, so again, you're leading the church with multiple campuses, staff wandering around the halls who are only, I'm sure they're delighted to stop what they're doing and talk to you about the Bible for a few minutes, but to scale that to like an ordinary sized church with an ordinary pastor, with less people on staff or payroll, this can be done with their friends, with other pastors in the community, with their seminary buddies. Hey, I'm thinking about this, or could you give me some thoughts on that? Any advice for how, I guess, someone in my situation could implement some of these ideas?
Yeah. So we have campus pastors who essentially are solo pastors. We have they might have a part-time worship leader, a part-time kids person who isn't even on site most of the time. And so yeah, they're in that kind of a context as well. And they're both really good at coffee shop stuff, being in the community, being around their people. One leads a life group. So midweek, he's got some of the church in his own living room. And, you're thinking about your sermon and able to bounce it around in that kind of a context. And so, yeah, just immersed in people's lives, which it's a good challenge for preachers to just really, it's part of contextualization is where are people at? How would this apply? And it helps us think through, how does, that getting it right and getting it across kind of a dynamic of, I want to get it right about what I'm saying about the text, but I want to effectively get it across to my actual hearers. And that requires knowing them and having those kinds of conversations. Yeah.
The guy who runs our life group ministry, Luke, we don't do this at our church. We might implement it. He was an elder at a church in Dubai years ago, and their life groups, instead of looking at the passage that was preached on Sunday, they would look at the passage that was going to be preached on next Sunday. So they were staying 1 week ahead of the preaching and talking through the passage and teasing these things out. And, the preacher is in one of those and is just scribbling notes and being able to like guide the conversation, but then also listen. Like, these are what my people think about this. And then be able to address things later on that come. And of course, you don't want to just mine people for content, but at the same time too, what a wonderful way to be with people thinking through the passage you're about to preach on.
Yeah, I love that. Wow.
We haven't done it yet, but we might. That's just an idea for the listeners to consider. Is there anything you do that's quirky or weird in your own, like, I guess, private? What's something that maybe wouldn't make sense for somebody if they were to sneak into your office? What would they see?
Oh, well, I have like this, like, I have a notebook, and that's like typical of like, I write so much stuff down, and then sometimes I won't even look at it again. Like, I just wrote it down, and it's like, I was like, am I wasting my time here? So it's kind of a quirk, because it doesn't seem very like time management effective, but I've got like a Word document open on my computer for my actual sermon notes. And I'll punt some stuff on there as well, but I'll write stuff out that it's either a really important thought, it's something I might explore, it's just something drawn from the text. Some of my questions of the text are there, but the act of writing it down just for my own brain, and I think a lot of people's brains, locks it in more than just sort of reading and moving on. I use a notebook quite a bit, and I've got stacks of them from years gone by of just, really? I was drawing because I was doing Venn diagrams a couple of weeks back. It might've been the sermon you were referencing before, but I just started like, kind of sketching out, this on a page. And so I like flip over to another page, and I'm starting to build that. And then thanks to AI, I could have them, build me the Venn diagram in a way that looked pretty and like the slide content that other people build. So it's funny. I would probably say some of this writing, sometimes I'm like, is this effective at all? But it is for my brain. And, I have these two sources going all the time. I'm building some stuff on the document on my computer. I'm scribbling in my little notebook and whatever.
Well, the research says it's not just good for your brain, it's good for every brain. That, I looked into this study that was done in Norway about students that were taking notes in class, and they're typing it out, and then students who are handwriting in the same class, and that the ones who are typing it out have more accurate notes, but their brain, it kind of bypasses the brain because they're hearing it and they're just transcribing it.
Yes.
But then when somebody is listening and then scribbling it out, they're getting less of the words and verbiage, but it goes through their brain, and their brain decides what's the most important thing that I just heard, and then writing that down. So I'm a huge advocate of handwritten notes. It's good for our brains. In a world that is just like getting more and more digital, I think analog is really healthy. It's a really healthy thing to do.
I was going to say, what does that study mean for our future? Because who's sitting and writing anything anymore? Yeah. But good. No, hey, that's confirming to me. Thanks, Mike.
All right. So you mentioned that there's a variety of preachers at Central. There's at least 3 you mentioned. 3 is a lot, but I also know that you're working on like developing more all the time. So why can't you just be satisfied with the 3 that you've got? Why are you building and investing into more preachers?
Yeah. So I think that our, just the way our model for church and I welcome people critiquing it. This whole idea of campuses is like, one church, multiple locations, and that whole dynamic. For us, it's just become a way that we can do effective, healthy church planting around this valley. So I'm in this city called Chilliwack, which is just over 100,000 people, but we have a reach to some rural communities that are between like 3,000 and 5,000, like multiple communities like that, who just didn't really have a healthy church in their community. And so we've been able to plant what we call campuses as a method for planting healthy churches. And so we planted 4 campuses. One of them has become its own church. It's doing really well. It's got a group of elders. It's got good preachers. It's got good pastor. It gives, it's self-sustaining. And so it was just time for them to kind of spread their wings like a young adult leaving their home. It's like, you don't need us. But please visit, we'll still call.
Yeah.
And so that's been really exciting. And so another determination we made in these rural communities was that like video preaching wasn't really like the way that we felt would be most effective. So this might feel like a crass way to talk, Mike, but I think there is some practicality to it. Say that I'm a 7.5 of a preacher, I'm a 7.5 out of 10. Is it better for this rural community to get me on video as a 7.5 preacher? Or is there like a 6.5 preacher that we can put in the room with them, who's available at the end to talk with them and pray with them and connect with them and answer questions that they have, or hear from people how that in the room applied to them? We just think that's more worthwhile. And so my like number evaluation is, totally an inaccuracy. But for us, the determination has just been to let's raise up real life preachers, get them in the room. And so our campus pastors are great preachers and they preach regularly in those spaces. But like myself, I preach 3 out of 5. We got these 2 other guys that preach at their campuses. Who's going to preach in each of our campuses when we're not preaching? And so the model has forced us to do something biblical, right? So 2 Timothy 2 is like, train faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Part of it's not just being the guy who preaches all the time. Part of being that guy is training others to preach as well. And so we think that like, our model for church planting, which gives these rural communities healthy elders, some support financially. We think that model works under one big umbrella. We can support it with preachers. There's a campus or 2 that don't have many preachers who can fill in. So we're sending preachers from other places to fill in and fill the pulpit. But what that's done is it's forced us over the years to identify preachers, people with the gift, and try and build into them, raise them up, sharpen them. And I love that because I really believe, so we'll have 1,500 people or so attend our church across our campuses on a Sunday. I just believe there's more people with the gift of preaching than 3 of us out of 1,500 people. And so my goal is, well, how do we create a process to find them, to build into them, and like train and release them? So for years, we did this thing called Preaching Lab, where myself and one of our campus pastors, we'd each teach on homiletics, teach on preaching one night each. So I do a Monday night. The other pastor would teach on a Monday night. We would assign everybody 2 texts, one Old Testament text, one New Testament text. And over the next number of weeks, they'd each have the opportunity to preach 2 15-minute sermons. Very short, but like applying what we taught them about preaching. And every time the second 15-minute sermon was better, like often a lot better. And not only that, we weren't just trying to find preachers for our church, our campuses. We're trying to raise up preachers and teachers for every ministry in our church, our women's ministry, our kids ministry, our youth ministry. And some really, it becomes clear, do not have the gift of preaching. And yet to take essentially a course that's very practical, it's a lab, you do the thing, is like to teach anybody in our church to communicate about Jesus, communicate about the difference the gospel makes in their life, talk about the Bible, like that's always a win. And so it was always beneficial for everybody. And yet every time we'd also essentially find 2 or 3 like gifted Bible teachers that we could work with across different ministries, sometimes being Sunday church preachers. And so we would invite them to come to this Tuesday morning ahead of time, have certain structures in place to help them. And then we would always review. So the campus pastor, the pastor at that particular location where they preach would always give them feedback in the days that followed. So they'd be collaborative on the way in, they'd preach, and then they'd get feedback on the other side. And it's been really, really fruitful. It takes a lot of work. It's in some ways it's easier to just do it yourself. It's one of those things. It's actually easier not to have an intern, or at least for the first half of the year, because you got to invest in them to the point where they can actually do things that actually make a difference. But in the long run, not only is it helpful and sustainable, I actually think it's us fulfilling what we're supposed to do. Like teach, train men who will teach others also, right? Older women teach and train the younger women, like that those kinds of things should be happening in our church. And so I love that endeavor of like, I want to mine preachers. I want to find them. I want to invest what I've got and get maybe even more joy in watching them preach well than doing it myself. So it's fun.
Yeah, I had to chuckle as you were talking about the system or the ecclesiology that you have, and how it's forced you to do something biblical, and you certainly are doing that, and that's great. Can I ask some kind of practical questions about this?
Yeah.
So you said you mine them. Well, like how do you do that? Is it like a Sunday morning announcement? Hey, anybody who wants to come? Is it kind of invite only? Do you have nominations? Because you mentioned that some people come through it and it's a great success, and then others, it's evident that this is not a gift that they currently have. That's probably not fun for them to learn that, or probably not fun for you to tell them that. So what's the vetting that goes in the front end to maybe minimize that? But then you also don't want to gatekeep it so much that somebody can't, so I'm asking because I really want to know. I really want to learn.
Yeah. So this last go around, we taught a course called Preach the Word, where it was an 8-week course on preaching, that it was just all teaching content. We'd get people discussing and all that kind of stuff, but it was 8 weeks of teaching on preaching. And then the assignment at the end is record yourself preaching a sermon. So that's the first time we've done that. We have a school of ministry we launched, and so we've kind of shifted away from the preaching lab course. But for 5-6 times we did this preaching lab course. We're just offering a course. There's no promises of we're gonna get you teaching. Like, but we're saying, I think even the tagline was something like equipping communicators of the gospel, or something like that, which is just a way of saying, like, if you take the preaching lab, you will be better at communicating Jesus, the Bible, the gospel to people, and that's a win. And so we'd start there. So there's no sort of like, we would talk about it as an opportunity for people to take a class to grow at this, as opposed to, hey, we're looking for preachers, come out to this. And then if they don't become one of the preachers, they'd feel like they failed.
Sure.
The other thing about the preaching lab is everyone would listen to these 15-minute sermons. So we'd have a bunch, like, say there's 12 people taking the class. We'd have 4 15-minute sermons per night. They'd preach for 15 minutes. Everyone would have these evaluation forms. Yeah. It seems daunting or scary. You're going to get feedback from everybody, not just like the couple instructors. Everybody gives everybody feedback. But you're pretty gracious with your feedback because you go next.
Yeah. You want to ingratiate people to you.
Yeah. And so but there's a measure of vulnerability to it. And so these groups every time would become quite close knit because you're being vulnerable. I'm being vulnerable. We're trying to be gracious with each other in our feedback, but honest. And so it's literally like, what's something they did well? And what's a piece of constructive feedback for next time? But we'd have quite complex, like dual-sided evaluation sheets on like their introduction, on their illustrations, on the exegesis, on all sorts of elements of the sermon. Some of the like how they kind of came off in their presence, all that kind of stuff. And that feedback would usually be kind of self-evident as well, is you're getting a sense that like, oh, this isn't probably for me. And it's sort of a group exercise in doing that. And yet it's amazing that there would be people that would get up there that have been in my congregation for a few years or a lot of years. They take the preaching lab, they get up there and they have it.
Yeah.
And I would never have known. I just wouldn't have guessed sometimes. And like for myself, I'm quite an introvert. Like it takes a lot of energy for me to like be social and be outgoing. Like Sundays are exhausting for me. One, because I find preaching exhausting as a deeply spiritual exercise. It's a lot of output, but I find the foyer interactions really important, but also exhausting, like output of shepherding. And so, you know, what we often think is like, hey, that guy's really charismatic over there. I bet he's a great preacher. Like he might not be. The quiet guy, you know, like I wouldn't have chosen to have a microphone strapped to my face and be the guy standing on the stage in front of my church. I really feel like the Lord called me into ministry, and that's surprising. And it also seems like quite a common thing in the Bible. Moses was not the guy who was like, I think I should stand in front of Pharaoh because I'm so eloquent. And yet he was called by God and equipped for the task. And so um, it's an interesting, the preaching lab was just enough to like give some people some teaching on preaching and then see if they have a measure of both gifting and abilities and convictions and stuff. And so it's a fun exercise. And so for us, it's not making any promises that we'll do anything with it after. Yeah. In fact, the majority of the people we wouldn't, but they all would leave saying like, that was actually really helpful for me. Hey, do you have Toastmasters out in
we do, and I've been thinking about going to it for about 15 years.
Yeah,
but I haven't. But yeah,
so this is sort of the Christian, you know. Yeah, it's the preaching, you know, version of Toastmasters. It's not the most comprehensive course on preaching at all, but we're giving people the opportunity to speak out loud in the room. Jerry Seinfeld had this bit where he was like, people's greatest fear is public speaking. Their second greatest fear is dying. And in a very Jerry Seinfeld way, he said, so if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. Just such a great line. And so the fact that everybody takes 2 shots at speaking in front of everybody for 15 minutes, they're conquering some fears, they're trying it on. It takes courage, and the Lord uses it. So we've had fun with it.
Yeah. And at the very least, you probably have, you know, more sympathetic listeners on a Sunday. If all that happens, you know, quote unquote, worst case scenario, they go through it and then, you know, that's it. They have a lot more respect.
Mike, I have people still who took the preaching lab, had these evaluation forums, and they'll come up to me and essentially use it on me. And I love that because they're not coming up to me just saying, hey, great sermon, Pastor, in a very general way. And you're like, oh, thank you. But like very specifically, you did this really effectively. I saw what you were doing there. Like, right. They got under the hood. They know what you're trying to accomplish. And to have like, you know, doing the preaching lab, having a dozen people or more 5-6 times, there's a lot of people in our church that are working with a much more robust framework of preaching, walking around. And honestly, it's just selfishly, I've gotten way better feedback about my preaching because they know what to look for. It's cool.
Well, for the person who's been listening to this and thinking, maybe I'll do this. I mean, I think maybe you might have pushed somebody over just with that little teaser there. Because, yeah, I think this is actually fantastic. It's so cool. This is one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk to you. Just like as this, I want to talk to you no matter what, but I want to highlight you on the show because like this is really, you know, what it's all about. It's not just, you know, experienced preachers getting better, but it's inexperienced preachers growing, and you're doing it on a local level. That's just like so good for them, so good for the various campuses of this church and the future independent church plants. Like such a great thing that you're doing. So hopefully it inspires, you know, a few people to take steps towards this direction.
Yeah.
Something I want to highlight in this is, so it's kind of I don't think you ever answered my question as to how people actually join. So people they sign up or they get invited?
Yes, they opt in. It's just like a class you can take. Anybody can take. It usually takes a fair bit of courage to be like, we let them know they're going to do some sermons. So that weeds out people who are like, I think I'll be terrible at this.
Yeah.
So it takes, so they sign up and then we only do something with it on the back end of like do something with that if we feel like there's something there. But every time there's somebody who winds up serving in different areas of ministry.
That's awesome. So anyone can sign up. And then I want to kind of drill into this a little bit. So men or women can sign up. And
yes,
what I know about you is that you and I, we share complementarian convictions about, I guess a couple different areas. I guess most visibly would have to do with like the Sunday morning sermon. And I came to know you through our cohorts, and in the cohort there was a diversity of views about this particular issue. And I found out that I think maybe you and me were the most conservative people in the class, and when it comes to this particular view. But I love the irony that like you are helping women to handle God's word and to communicate it with excellence, whilst simultaneously having a view that some would be surprised that you're trying to equip, upskill, and release female Bible teachers. Is that a disconnect for you, or do you see this as like actually living out your complementarian convictions?
Yes, the latter.
Obviously, I know. I'm setting you up.
Yeah. I firmly believe that leaders in the church, so Ephesians chapter 4, Jesus gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, the teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And then it talks about everybody unified and reaching maturity. We proclaim, warning everyone and teaching everyone, leading everyone to maturity. And so I believe that leaders in the church are there to help every man, woman, and child grow into Christian maturity. That includes in areas of gifting, releasing them to all sorts of ministry. My complementarian conviction is that there's one reservation for that of elder. So that the kind of headship idea would be in the home and in the church. In the church context, it's not just men, it's elder qualified men in one office. But that one office is not like the top of a pyramid in a business where the CEO is on top. In the kingdom of God, it's like this reverse. It's like you will be the servant of all. So Jesus is giving his disciples the Last Supper. What has he done before that? He's washed all of their feet, and he's betrayed later that night. To a man, they all know who the leader is, but he's kneeling down, washing their feet. That's the kingdom of God. Leaders serve. In fact, Ephesians chapter 5 would say, as a husband, yes, he should lead his wife. She should submit to her husband. But what's the husband supposed to do? He's supposed to lay down his life for her. Yeah. Meaning if someone's sacrificing most, it's him. If one of the two is dying, it's him. And so it's a servant leadership. And that servant leadership is given for the flourishing of every man, woman, and child. And so the husband exists in the home to lead in a way that leads to the flourishing of his family. The elders in the church lead in such a way that leads to the flourishing of every man, woman, and child. And so I believe that the Holy Spirit gifts women with leadership gifts, with teaching gifts. And so yeah, I want to, just like in the preaching lab, finding preachers, I want to discover those and build into those. And so, we open up our preaching lab to anybody who wants to attend it. And so we have a women's ministry where they do Bible teaching, and you know what? They're some of our best preachers. There's this one woman who took our preaching lab the last time we did it, and she was the best female preacher I had heard in all the years. I was like, you have a real gift. I passed her on to our women's director, and this woman ended up writing the Bible study content for their last session. Wow. Involved in teaching when they do their women's gatherings, gifted to do it, passion for the word, effective in communicating. And I love that. The irony is that before I became the lead pastor, we actually didn't have just male elders. We had a male and female lead team. So we kind of shifted from a somewhat egalitarian structure to a complementarian structure, and yet more women as a complementarian church have actually been like fostered in their gifting and released for teaching. And like we have more. So when we were in a Egalitarian church, the women's ministry would sometimes watch a DVD of a woman with hair and was from Texas, because there just weren't. So we're kind of egalitarian, I guess, but like weren't raising up Bible teachers. And here we are in a place where many, many more have. And so some might see that as an irony. I just see that as fulfilling what we're supposed to do. Like Peter was right in Acts 2. The prophecy is fulfilled. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, and there ought to be spaces for them to do that. Older women are to teach and train younger women. There need to be spaces to do that effectively, and there needs to be training to do that as best as we can. And so, yes, we have that reservation of elder and pulpit, and yet we are training a lot of women who then go on to speak on youth nights and in the large group kids ministry. And in our context in Chilliwack here, that's like 100 kids, right? And they're getting effective Bible teaching in the large group session of that on a Sunday morning, and our women's ministry and so on. And so it's been a thrill. It's been really exciting. I get just as excited about finding women really capable of Bible teaching as I do some of the guys. So.
Yeah, well, I love, thanks for highlighting the consistency in this, that, this is not you pausing your complementarian convictions, but this is you embodying them. And and I love that. In our own church a couple of years ago, this became kind of an issue that I had to bring clarity on, which is just always a very, very challenging, exhausting thing. And then kind of in my church network, it was another thing. Had to kind of advocate for clarity in our church network. And it could be hard. And then also too, on this kind of side gig, with Expositors Collective, I'm traveling around the world, like equipping, training, empowering, helping ladies to kind of lean into a gift that God has given them. And I want to help them see it, like,
praise God,
expressed in those appropriate venues. So anyway, so I just thought that was a fun thing to talk about, because you and I, we agree on this.
Yes.
One more thing. Okay, I have the last question, but I'm sneaking this one in, so I didn't send you this one in advance. So you said, like, preaching is exhausting. Like, why is it exhausting? And I guess on that, why do you keep doing it? But then also, like, you want to unpack, like, why is it exhausting to you?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So sometimes on a very practical level, people will be like, what's it like? Like, what's preaching like? Because I don't think people, if you're not a preacher, it's hard to explain the weightiness of it.
Sure.
So on the one hand, really practically, it's like you're writing a finals paper. Like it's a big deal. It's a lot of study. You got a deadline looming, and you need to finish this thing. But instead of just handing that finals paper into your professor who will read it privately, you deliver it to a crowded room. And then on Monday, you wake up in the morning and you're kind of relieved. And then you're like, oh yeah, I actually need to start again tomorrow, And so there's that.
The crowded room is full of people, some of whom are Christians and some of whom aren't, and some of whom are 75 and some of whom are 14 and some of whom hate you and most of whom like you, but some of whom are, so that's another thing as well too.
Absolutely. And so then you need to layer on, of course, it's not just that practical of writing some sort of paper and delivering it. It is, I believe preaching is thus saith the Lord. I think preaching is a bold thing. It takes courage and it requires real work behind the scenes, because you're not just going up. Here's what I think it's saying. You're like, this is what God's word says. Therefore, and to stand in front of a church with that kind of confidence requires a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, like really just prayer, like on your face prayer, in the word study, checking your work with those who've gone before us and effective preaching resources. And you really do get up there and say, God says this thing. And that kind of, that is preaching. Teaching, can be we can categorize this as sort of, here's three views. And I'll leave those with you. You can now make the preachers go up and say, some believe this, some believe this. This is our conviction. God is called. And what does that mean for us? And
here's what you're called to obey.
Amen. And
because that's a challenge, because you want to be right, because you're actually calling people to obey this. So that's right. Why the preparation matters so much, because you're I want to say imposing this on people, but you're presenting to people and saying to obey this is to obey God, to disobey this is to disobey God. So the prep is so important.
Yes, it's very weighty. It's spiritually weighty. Another piece was, it took me a long time. I'm kind of dense. It took me a while to figure this out. My wife and I would have our worst fights on Saturday nights. Wouldn't you know it? And it took us years to realize that each other weren't just the most annoying person randomly on Saturday nights, but that there's an element of spiritual warfare to this. Is the devil doesn't want us to proclaim the word of God faithfully and apply it to people's lives and for them to respond with faith and trust and deepening discipleship. He wants to blow it up. Like, so there's Saturday nights where I feel like, why do I do this? Questioning my calling, irritability with each other in the household, which is the devil's way of being like, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this. And also just that kind of impulse to want to pack it in. So those are regular for me. I'm a little bit heartened that guys like John Piper express the same sorts of things. They like there's a level of torment to it. And yet I see the fruitfulness. The Lord sustains. The Christian life, whatever the calling is richest when we're pressed and rely on him. Mm-hmm. The Lord actually does a deep work. I had a mentor years ago who said, God makes the worst of sinners preachers.
Yeah.
And I was always annoyed that he kept saying, like, every time I hung out with him, he'd tell me that. He's like, look me in the eyes and say, he makes the worst of sinners preachers. The way he would say that is, the preacher is forced to spend time in the word of God. That does a refining work. It does a sanctifying work. It's not that we're so great. I love what Jared C. Wilson said. It was like his tag on his Twitter. It was his Twitter handle for a while. It was something like, someone came up to him and said, "Oh, so you're the preacher, so you're the answer guy." And he's like, "No, I'm the guy who points people to the answer guy." And I really truly believe that. I am in the refiner's fire with everybody else. The Lord, I'm not a better person. I'm a fellow pilgrim on the way, or I'm just one beggar telling other beggars where I found bread. I really believe that. And in his grace, he forces me into his word, and he does a work there. It doesn't return void. And so that all is a hodgepodge of the weightiness of preaching for me. I love it on the one hand, and it is such a burden on the other, but it's one that bears fruit, and the Lord sustains me. And so I keep at it.
Wow. Thanks for that. With zero prep, you are so articulate talking about the exhausting nature of preaching. It's almost like you've been doing it for 15 years.
It's almost like you asked me a question that struck a nerve I had a lot to say about.
Yeah. Well,
for me, Mike, this is it's a unique space, right? There are some other preachers in our church, of course, but there's something refreshing. And I think that that's one of the beautiful things about this ministry that you do, the podcast that you produce for preachers and anyone else listening, is it's a unique group. We are, no one really gets it unless they've done it and especially do it regularly. And it's a blessing to get to be around each other.
Yeah. There's some niche conversations, and lots of people have hard jobs. And, maybe there's podcasting communities for other hard jobs, but this is one of them. And it's good to talk about that. So last question. So I listened to your most recent sermon, and you're probably going to preach again this Sunday or next Sunday. I don't know what the math is, 3 out of 5, but what are you hoping to improve on? Like, are you hoping to get a little bit better each week? Probably. What's something you're kind of working on these days?
Yeah, I'm preaching this week, and in a passage in Luke chapter 6 where Jesus prays all night And then he calls 12 apostles from a bigger group of disciples. And so I'm mulling that over. A few of the ways that I am trying to improve on my preaching. One of them is to add more variety in how I preach. So earlier in Luke's gospel, we're preaching a series in the Gospel of Luke. It'll probably off and on. We'll probably do it for 3 years, something like that. But a number of weeks ago, I was preaching on 20 verses about John the Baptist in Luke 3, and I did a 10-point sermon. I've never done a 10-point sermon in my life. And honestly, the feedback was, it was really faithful to the text. I was showing all kinds of things that were there. And essentially, I think the sermon was something along the lines of lessons from history's greatest wilderness prophet or something like that. But literally just about being in the faith, wrestling. Like he had such a unique role, and yet so many things, I would say 10 things from the text applied to our lives. And you can think like 10 points, why would you do that? That would feel like utter chaos. A lot of people, they found it really, really engaging because every few minutes there's a new point. Like the note takers are like, thank you. Like, because sometimes if you have a 3-point sermon and it's 15 minutes in that point, they're like, are we still on that point? Because I think we've been on that point for quite a long time. Where are we in this thing? And so it was a fun structure to do because every few minutes it'd be like, all right, point number 7, here we go, and on. And that was really fun. The text lent itself to that. Many texts do not. So I've tried to build some variety in. This is an encouragement I've given my fellow preachers in our church, is some really have a tendency to always do a 3-point sermon.
Sure.
And it's like, but like sometimes we're doing a whole chapter of Old Testament narrative. You're still doing 3 points. It's like, sometimes it's 5 verses in Luke's gospel. It's 3 point, like, do we need to do that? Like, I don't know what verse in the Bible tells us we must do that. How did Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where are the 3 points in that? So I like the variety. I want it to be text driven. And then thinking about, how does this engage my hearers? Mike, you probably know better data than me on, like, when you were talking about writing things down and having some data on that. Where was I going to go with that?
I don't know, but I'm reaching for my data right now, so I'm ready.
Oh, here we go. The idea of like people's attention spans and how they're shrinking, like 5 minutes or something like that. Like, what is a preacher?
My attention span shrunk as you were talking. I was like, let me reach for something.
that point where I became really disengaging and paused for a while. Yeah.
I was I'm bored for 1.5 seconds. Time to switch.
So like, how do you get it right and get it across? So one thing I'm really working on, this is just one category of what I'm working on, but I'm working on how I deliver it. And I'm trying to intentionally bring some variety to it. I think the text sometimes really lends itself to, like, I've preached 1-point sermons when I've just gotten up there and preached it. And of course there's a measure of structure to it. And then, of course, a 10-point sermon or something like that. So I'm having variety in points. I'm letting the text kind of build it. As I see the sermon this Sunday, it might actually be a 3-point sermon, because there's the portion where Jesus is praying. Then there's the portion where he calls his disciples. And then there's a few verses on, he goes and he starts the sermon on the plain. But it says that the apostles, and like a large group of disciples and a crowd are there. There's these 3 categories listening to him. And I think that might be its own kind of interesting dynamic point. But the reason I would do the 3 is because the text may lend itself that way. So that's an area for me. The other is just elements of contextualization. It's always a work in progress. I think it was Karl Barth who said, we hold the Bible in one hand, the newspaper in the other. Is we need to know the Word of God and communicate it. We also need to know what's going on in the world, what's going on, not just globally, but what's happening in my community, what's happening in the people in my church. It's funny, like, contextualization. I meet with these pastors of the more rural campuses, and their group mix is different. And so some of that how they preach is even going to be different. And we live 30 minutes away from each other. And so just understanding the times and how to preach to people's hearts, where the conviction lies, where the encouragement is needed to draw those out. So I'm always thinking contextualization, application, and a little bit of variety to my sermon structures. Those are a couple things right now.
Well, well, very cool. People are learning from you how to preach, and it's always encouraging to hear how you're also trying to learn and to improve. If you're looking to preach with variety, may I recommend Jeffrey Arthur's book called Preaching with Variety.
Hey.
He was a guest on the show a while ago, and this is a good little book talking about how the different literary genres lend itself towards different styles of preaching. But I'll leave that to you.
Noted.
Yeah. Well, Matt, it's a real pleasure. Thanks for making time to talk with me and talk with us. Thank you for bringing us in on this journey that began when you were a young adult preaching to other young adults, and to now you are a full-grown adult talking to. But yeah, well, thanks so much, and we'll have a link in the descriptions if people want to follow along in Luke with you or anything else. And so, to the listeners of this show, I hope that this conversation helps you to grow in your personal study and your public proclamation of God's word. Thanks again, Matt.
You're a kindred spirit, Mike. It's a pleasure to chat with you.
Hey, well, big thanks to Mike Neglia for being the host. It was fun to be on the other side of the microphone. Again, I commend the Expositors Collective to you. And next up on the pod, I chat with Dr. Jonathan Pennington about the Gospel of Matthew. Fascinating stuff about that gospel. Discipleship to Jesus' vision for human flourishing. You do not want to miss it. And every once in a while, I remind you to help get the podcast out there, which has been lying dormant for a year. I'd love it if you send an episode to someone in your life. Leave an honest 5-star review at Apple Podcasts, and engage the Deep Thoughts Instagram and YouTube. That just helps it get out there, makes it worth doing. Thanks for listening to Deep Thoughts. I hope it helps you in fostering deep faith.